My name is CARY DABNEY. I am the Director of the Office of Ministry to African American Catholics for the Diocese of Cleveland. I was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses from my birth. Was the oldest of four boys. My stepfather was a elder of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's the faith tradition I came up in. The changing point for me happened at a very young age when I experienced for the first time the loss of someone I was very close to. And the question of what happens to them after they die. And I was told that they would not be part of that group to experience paradise because they were not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. When that individual was probably the most, shall I say, example of the way Jesus lived, certainly more so than I. And so that right there made me realize this definition of who God is and this judgmental nature of God is just far too narrow of a portrayal of God for me. When that happened, I was 12 years old. So I still had 6 years to live under my father's home. So with no direct revealing to them that my mind has beginning to shift, I live under my father's home faithfully. As far as I knew, they had no idea that I was on a trajectory going outside of the organization. When I turned 18 and became an adult, I made the decision of disassociating myself from being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I did not immediately go to any faith tradition. I kind of journeyed around in my looking for faith. It took a very long time for me to identify the Catholic Church as the church. Primarily because at the formation process of being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, especially being raised from such a young age to being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, is such that the Catholic Church itself is identified as, if it's on a scale of 1 to 10 in evilness, okay, the Catholic Church is at the top of that scale, with the Holy Father being identified as the active Antichrist on the earth. So obviously, in my search, there were many times I was literally running away from the Catholic Church. Like, it did not even register on my radar. It wasn't until two particular things, both my wife, who is a cradle Catholic and who I had married, and then number two was my own studies, religious studies and philosophy, which I began to study as an undergrad, led me to the Catholic tradition. Whenever you're studying philosophy, at some point you're going to study medieval philosophy. And you cannot study medieval philosophy without studying St. Thomas Aquinas. He's just too big of a figure in the medieval philosophy. Regardless of what end of the spectrum you're on, whether you're a firm, confirmed believer of the faith or full-blown atheist, if you study medieval philosophy, you have to read Thomas Aquinas. So for me, it was the studying of St. Thomas Aquinas that for the first time, he was asking the very same questions I was asking. And when he presented his answers, even before he got to his answers, he was already coming up with what the objections would be. So for me, that was the first time of bringing both of those worlds together. Keep in mind, I had been to Mass several times before because my wife was a cradle Catholic. So my wife, though initially she was not practicing when we first were married, over the years, she began to practice her faith. I had children who were attending Catholic school and also growing in the faith. So I had been to Mass before, whether it was funeral masses, my own children's sacraments, my own children's baptisms. But it wasn't until the intellectual side of me embraced the tradition and I submitted sincerely that the Catholic tradition is the tradition that my journey was leading me to, that I went to Mass and with the veil completely torn away, that when the priest held up the body of Christ, it really overwhelmed me. That ignited the spiritual to go along with the intellectual, which it almost feels like, when we watch these space movies and they go into hyperspace and you feel literally thrown through the picture. That's what happened that moment when the Eucharist was brought up. It's like I saw streaks of stars, and I was just pulled towards it. That day, I went into the sacristy and found, I'll never forget, Deacon Jim Brown, and said, "What do I have to do to come into the faith?" Or almost as the Ethiopian eunuch said, "What do I have to do to be baptized?" It was literally the same question I said to him. That event took place, that attending that mass happened in the summer, around June or July. At the parish I was attending, RCIA started in September. So that September is when I started RCIA, and then the following Easter Vigil, which I'll never forget, was March 31st, 2013, is when I came into the church.